listeners. Our guest today is Ellen Kirschman. She's an author. You'll find out of what in a minute. They call her the cop doc, and that would be because she's a clinical psychologist. She works with first responders, and some of the work that she does has been described as unbelievably transformative. Kristin Warren, who has been on my show a few times and who does the Firefighter Deconstructed podcast, recommended Ellen. Ellen is a mentor of hers, and I can definitely see why. This is one of those shows that I'll soon not forget. Thanks for joining us.
I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years, and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all we promised, we'd be cordial.
Ellen, thank you so much for coming on our First Responder Mental Health Network show on Mental Health News Radio.
My pleasure.
Thanks to Kristin Warren for A, being a fabulous human being, B, for doing a podcast, The Firefighter Deconstructed, and C, for introducing us to you.
I'm grateful to her as well, too. She's one of my favorite people.
Yeah. Now I was looking, yes, she is. She's amazing. I was looking at your website, and it says, people call me the cop doc. So can you explain what that means?
Well, it means that I've been dealing with first responders, mostly police, but also, of course, firefighters and dispatchers and the occasional emergency medical person for about 35 years. So, and mostly when I'm working with first responders, they call me doc. So that's how I came to be the cop doc. There are other kinds of cop docs, by the way, and those would be police officers who have gotten their advanced degrees and have become therapists themselves. We also refer to them as cop docs.
Gotcha. What got you into wanting to be a cop doc?
That's a very long story. I have a short background in law enforcement as a probation officer. And I really love stories. I love people's stories. That's why I became a clinician. And of course, law enforcement is a story culture. It's how the training and learning and tradition get transmitted largely through stories. And I really liked the I have some what I would call personality traits that are not dissimilar to what you might find in police officers. I am a pretty direct person. I like to be active. I like to be out and about, and I like to be dealing with things that seem to be really important. Some people might say I was a trauma junkie, but I really like being on the front lines with and working with healthy people who have problems that relate to the work that they do rather than serious issues with mental health. So when I was sort of doing just regular old gumshoe therapy with people, I was quite impatient and it wasn't really fulfilling for me. And I started out doing that as a clinical social worker before I became a psychologist, and I was working in a large hospital in a psychiatric unit, and I was seeing a number of police officers' wives. So this is quite a long time ago, so there weren't that many female police officers. And I'd hear all of these stories about what was going on at home. And whenever I would say, well, why don't you bring your husband in with you and let's talk about this? Not only will the husbands never show up because of the stigma of going to see a mental health person, but pretty soon the wives would drop out. So I was trying to figure out what was the relationship between the troubles at home and this incredibly difficult profession. And I began to read up on it, and then I decided, maybe in a way that's a bit naive looking back at it, that, if you can explain something, you can cure it. Turns out that's not the truth, or not the whole truth at any rate. So I put together a class because I was really pretty bored doing what I was doing. And I called it I Love a Cop. And I brought it up to the local community college, who thought it was a terrific idea, put it in the catalog. And the first day the catalog came out, the class was filled and there were 40 women on the waiting list.
Wow.
So I knew I had hit a real need in the community, and things just took off from there, because that's actually in the late 70s. No one was really paying any attention to the families of first responders. So there was a lot of interest and a lot of need.
Yeah, I mean, thank God we have so much more attention focused on it now, and especially now. I like to give the date during shows now, because that way people that are listening in the future know exactly what was going on in the world. Today is April 28th of 2020, so we're near the we're going to open up the world from coronavirus date, which has everybody excited, nervous, all kinds of things.
Gee, not where I live. I'm in California. They have just extended the shelter-in-place order till the end of May.
Oh, I hope. I'm in North Carolina. It's been extended to May 8th here. I hope that they extend it further here, but it's just fascinating to me how different it is from even county to county.
And I'm glad they're paying attention to those variations, because I think they're important.
Absolutely. Now, you also have a writing career, and I thought I'm going to read this because I love this paragraph. After my third book, I began to wonder if it wouldn't be easier to make things up. It isn't. In fact, it's harder, although it's more fun, because it gives me the opportunity to take pot shots at nasty cops, unethical psychologists, and a few of my ex-husbands. Very well written paragraph. Let's talk a little bit about that and your books.
Okay. Well, I write the Meyerhoff mystery series, Dot being my mother's name, Meyerhoff being my maternal grandmother's name. And Dot is no surprise, police psychologist. And she's in her early 50s. And in many ways, people ask me, well, is she autobiographical? Not entirely. I mean, the things she gets to do, because I'm trying to write a book that's interesting and exciting. I probably would have lost my license if I had done some of the things that she does, assault with a deadly weapon and impersonating a public official and so forth. But I really wanted to use fiction as a vehicle to help the reader really see inside what tends to be very stereotypical in a lot of mysteries and fictions. The cops are, they bust down doors and kill 3 people and jump over mountains and go home and have dinner and great sex. I mean, that's not how police work works.
Exactly.
So I wanted to use this, my character, as a way of helping the reader really get to see the human being behind the badge. And I was able to use some things that actually are based on clients I've treated in the past or in the present sometimes, and experiences that I have had as a police psychologist, and build the story around these real issues for people. So the first book relates a bit to police suicide, in which a young rookie takes his own life and leaves a note blaming his therapist, Meyerhoff, and that comes out of my interest in field training and what that is like, and sometimes how hard that is on someone who perhaps shouldn't have been hired in the first place. So it looks at all of those issues.
Right.
The second one, the right, wrong thing, is about what it is like to accidentally kill someone who had a cell phone instead of a weapon in her hand. And it also looks at what it's like to be a female in law enforcement. And this was based on a client that I had who did have to kill somebody off duty, and she had been very badly treated, not well received by her male co-workers in her department until she killed this person, and then suddenly she became everyone's hero. And this really was appalling to her, and she said, if this is what it takes to join the old boys club, I don't want it. Right. So I was trying to look at all those issues surrounding women in law enforcement. And then the third book, which is called The Fifth Reflection, I was looking at the incredible burden and psychological torment that comes with being an ICAC investigator. That means investigating internet crimes against children, and it's a very difficult assignment, what that does psychologically, not just to the officer, but to his ability to relate to his family.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that piece, as we've done a lot of shows on that particular topic with children, but also cyber crimes against adults as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that piece of the effect it has on the officer and their relationship with their family?
Well, we know in general that when police officers, or I think any first responder, what puts them at risk more often than anything else is some horrible crime that happens to a child.
Right.
And the reasons for this is that the usual ways that first responders have of responding to the things that they see and the multiple traumas to which they're exposed doesn't work when the victim is a child. So, for example, humor doesn't work. There's nothing funny about a child who has been raped or tortured.
Right.
Or there is no way, and cops and firefighters make all kinds of, they have the gallows humor they use to blow off steam. Well, you just can't do that with a kid.
Right.
Also, another way that people make sense, first responders make sense of some of the things they see, are to sort of blame the person for their own misfortune. So if you are a criminal, that's on you if you chose to do that. Or if you're a gang member and you put yourself in harm's way, that's on you. There's no way to blame a child whose mother or father was driving drunk, rolled the car, and the child was killed because they weren't because the parent was drunk driving and the child was not in a safety seat. Right. So those usual ways of dealing with this are just don't work. So that's one of the issues, because when you're doing these internet crimes against children, you are forced over and over and over again, and sometimes for way too long, in my opinion, to view these terrible scenes and to listen to children in great distress, and over again. And so many of the people doing this work have children of their own. So it's really hard to have emotional distance from what you're seeing, because you can really relate to it. Sometimes the children look like your children or have the same pajamas your kids have. Right. So it brings it much closer. And then the parents can then become overly restrictive on who will watch their kids, whether they'll allow babysitters, or if any male relatives, they sometimes can become overly protective or overly suspicious. I had officers tell me that they no longer will bathe their own children because they have seen too many awful scenes that involve a child in a bathtub.
Right.
So it just totally can crush their ability to be intimate with their child, or to touch the child in an intimate way, because they've seen too much harm like that.
What I think is interesting, because I know a few first responders that have done that kind of work, and what they have said to me is, I was really good at doing that work. So I was kept in it longer than I should have been, because there's a high burnout rate. And yet I started thinking, why am I good at this? And then I burned out too. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was interesting. They really had a crisis of conscience. Why am I able to do this? And that until they weren't able to do it anymore.
Hey listeners, a quick but important notice for all the shows that we'll be doing for our first responders. In 2018, the number of police officers, firefighters, EMTs, and veterans, anyone who's considered a first responder, who died of suicide was greater than the combined total killed in the line of duty. More attention is being paid, but help is often elusive. Even with more available resources, those who are first in line to help us actually asking for help for themselves, that can be the hardest thing for them to do. Mental Health News Radio Network is working with Stepstone Connect to give voice to our incredible first responders. Stepstone Connect is an organization born of the belief that accessibility and confidentiality will eliminate traditional barriers to treatment. Privacy and the peace of mind that comes with it, combined with easy, everywhere access, underlines Stepstone's mission and treatment philosophy. It's simple. With access to the internet and a device with a camera, you're a click away from leading mental health clinicians who specialize in the treatment of PTSD and other trauma-related injuries for first responders and their families. If you or someone you care about is struggling, please don't let another day pass before discovering what Stepstone can do. Stronger connections, everywhere access, stepstoneconnect.com. You can find out more by going to their website, stepstoneconnect.com, or call 800-495-3761. Now back to the show.
That's very insightful and interesting. I think that if you're good at it, it makes it hard to leave, because basically that their children are being harmed continually. And if you feel you're being replaced by someone who's not as good at it as you are, then you might feel kind of survivor's guilt about moving on. Right. But it's a flood. The floodgates are open. There's no way any individual can stop this. Particularly, I live right in the middle of Silicon Valley, and where all the our wonderful internet and high-tech stuff was originating, and those things all made it so much easier to be a pedophile and to trade these files and to do this these online crimes against children. So it's a really tough assignment.
Speaking of, the tough assignments, right now is a tough assignment for every first responder. What are you seeing being so close to the field, but not, out in the field the way that first responders are? What are you seeing from your side that's going on, because of the coronavirus?
Well, many different things. I mean, I think the stress is unbelievable because cops like, of course, to be in control. That's what keeps them safe, and knowledge keeps them safe. And here they are fighting an invisible enemy with basically an unknown ending. We don't know how nobody knows, so that the lack of knowledge is really difficult. The idea that they might be exposed to this virus themselves or bring it home to their families is extremely stressful. I'm hearing some things about problems with management, lack of the personal protective gear or adequate gear, staffing issues because officers are getting sick as they've been exposed. In some places, I think early on in this pandemic, the crime was going down, but now evidently it's going up again because people are being forced to shelter in place with other folks, and they don't like these other people, or they don't know how to get along with other people. So I guess there was a real uptick in murders in a couple of cities. And then having the judgment calls about when to intervene, when not to intervene, and your personal safety versus the safety of the citizens. So there's just a lot of brand new challenges that nobody really, they're trying hard and fast to try to figure out policies and procedures, but I think we weren't prepared for this, and it's hard to play catch up.
Yeah, it is definitely hard to play catch up. And so many people have, said, well, you need to call this person, you need to call that person. And even, people on my network. And I finally just got out loud to myself that I was on a conference call with everybody. I said, there is nobody to call. Nobody knows the answers here. There is no specialist on the planet that knows everything. This is new for everybody. So I think we got to get real comfortable with that fact.
We do. And first responders, that is not something they're very comfortable with. They really want to know what's on the other side of a door before they make an entry. And that's, knowledge is power, and it keeps them safe. And so with trying to function with all of this we don't know in the atmosphere, makes everything a lot more difficult.
Do you think that you'll end up writing or adding something about this to one of your books?
Actually, I would. I'm in the process of doing a second edition for my I Love a Firefighter book, and my deadline for the publisher is in June, and then this COVID-19 pandemic hit. So I've been talking with my editors. I am going to have to add some things about it into the book as we go along.
Not surprised at all. It's why I do the dates. I used to be so against that, these shows. I have shows from 8 years ago that people still listen to, and I never wanted, a date on them. Because the information, at least some of it, not all my shows, believe me, some of my shows can be taken down, but some of them have some really good information that, a date doesn't matter. But now it's like, nope, we're telling the date because I want people to know. And we have listeners all over the world too. We're all in this together. So the date now matters, which is really interesting. It's a different way of operating here from that front too.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is I've been around for a long time, and this is certainly the most, there's never been anything like this that I can recall in my life. There was polio, which I remember when I was a kid, but it did not have, you knew what to do, sort of, to not get polio. And then you knew what to do not to get AIDS, and you know what to do not to get a lot of things. But right now, we think we know what to do. The information is developed day by day, which is just to simply hunker down and not only be afraid of your fellow human beings, be afraid of your own hands.
Yeah.
It's definitely something new.
And varies in different places in the world. I asked this of a psychotherapist in Italy that's a friend. He's in Florence, Italy, which, big city. And of course they are, you don't go outside at all. And if you do go outside to go to the store, you better, have a reason and proof and all this. And then I said, that's how it is here too, in the States, except in the country. In the country, people are still, it's starting to trickle into more serious now out in the country. It's like we're in completely different countries here in the United States. And I said, how is that in Italy? Oh, the same thing. A lot of people that live in the city that got sort of stuck here when the quarantine hit are telling themselves, I wish I would have gone to my country house, or, because it's less restrictive. And yet, should it be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't know. And as somebody said, there are no border walls between cities or counties or states. So the idea that, things will move from place to place, and what we need, we have a very good governor out here in California. As a matter of fact, I just was listening to, he talks every day at noon, and I just listened to him today because I was interested in when we're going to open up or how we're going to open up, and very thoughtful, very cautious, and very interested in trying to be respectful of various counties and various cities, so that relying on the local health officials, but recognizing that what works in one place may not work in another. So, for example, I live right near San Francisco. So the 7 counties in the Bay Area, we are all have this extended shelter in place to the end of May, but not every place in California. Some of the more rural areas will not have that.
Right. And that's kind of how it is here. I felt kind of a bit of cognitive dissonance hearing people that are my very good friends that are in New York City, what they're going through, as opposed to what I'm dealing with living out in a very, very rural area.
Uh-huh.
I've thought solidarity with what they're going through. I should be doing that here too. And yet no one is doing that here.
Wow.
So I keep having a pesky neighbor invite me over for dinner, a very lonely person, and saying things like, I'll just take risks in life. And I'm looking at her like, that is do you know who you're talking to and what I do for, like, that is about the dumbest thing.
Really?
But also realizing, okay, this is how different people handle extreme stress. So trying to have that mental health focus in on it too can be taxing, as you know, more than I do.
Well, I posted a number of articles that I thought were really useful. I'm a bit on information overload, and I expect other people are too, because
Absolutely.
Everybody in the world has advice about how to survive all of this emotionally and psychologically. But I sort of cherry picked some articles I thought were really, really good and maybe a little bit off the mainstream of advice, and posted them on my website. And also I blog with Psychology Today, and I repeated 2 of the blogs that I put up about coping with all of this, because it's very difficult. You were talking about New York City. I have a friend in New York City, a family friend. She's 101 years old, and she's in a nursing home. She's cognitively pretty much all there, but she is unable to walk. And she is the most cheerful, positive human being I have ever met. And since this pandemic, they've canceled all activities. There's no eating in a dining room anymore. You eat in your room. The people that help her, the staff, walk around looking like they're probably all in hazmat suits.
Right.
Because this is a collection of very old, very ill people. And we know that I think they now are calling them congregate populations. This is where this virus can spread like wildfire. So she is, and she can't read because her eyesight isn't good. So she is mentally so underwhelmed that it's incredibly stressful. She's so bored.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah, that's where I, have patience with this neighbor, because she's also elderly and she's a little bit infirm, and it's, I understand people are not coming to visit. Can't just go sit and play cards. Can't. And that's hard. So
yeah, it's really hard, I think.
Yeah. And we have other people too that have kids that are on the autism spectrum, as an example.
Right.
And some of them are adults. And a friend of mine said, we just had to tell our son, whom we love, who lives 6 houses down from us, no, you cannot come over for dinner.
Right.
And you can't for a while, and trying to, make him understand. So it's hard for everybody. I wanted to ask you this, the first responder piece. I mean, obviously first responders are out there working, most of them anyway. They're still doing their job, and they're doing it under duress more than usual. And, and working harder because their call to duty is ratcheted up by God knows how much. So I know the fallout, so to speak, from this is a lot of mental health help needed. How have you kind of looked at that, or have you looked at that lens of the aftermath of this from that mental health perspective for our first responders?
Well, I think that when this settles down, hopefully it will settle down, then we're going to probably see an uptick in the need for mental health counseling, because first responders, as you know, when they're working, they're just working.
Yeah.
And so they're going to stay really, really focused, maybe overly focused. Maybe they can't give themselves chance to process emotionally because they're going to have to turn around and go back to work again. But I think we're going to see that need particularly after this workload evens out some. Most of my colleagues, I volunteer at a place called the First Responder Support Network, which you probably heard about from Kristin.
Yeah.
And they're doing a lot of online support groups, peer-led, drop in once a week via Zoom and we'll just talk, or there are AA meetings for first responders that are online, and a great many of my colleagues are doing distance therapy or telemental health.
Yep.
To be available to any of the first responders who really want to talk about how to manage things, or just want to vent about their concerns and their apprehensions.
There has to be that place to vent. I mean, I've been lucky enough to be on some of those types of calls too, just as, running this network and the first responder mental health network that we started late last year. What good timing, and I say good with a weird kind of a quote around it, because what's good about what we're going through? Nothing. But it's been interesting to hear things like just the brass tacks of every day. Okay, so I'm working harder. I'm potentially bringing something home that's dangerous to my family. My kids are at home, or I'm being told my kids have to be at home. I can't take them to daycare, can't take them to school, but I have to work. So what do I do with my kids? Like, there's all these other things that people are having to think about. It's not just as easy as everybody shelter in place.
No, it's not. There's just a ton of things to consider for sure. And I think that there are some things that may come out of this that are worth saving.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes.
And, one of those would be the importance of family, the importance of having some more spaciousness in your life if you have it. Not everybody does, of course. and just the importance of human connection and the fragility of life. It's really quiet where I live now. I'm about 30 minutes south of the San Francisco airport. No planes in the air.
Yeah.
It made such a difference, and the sky is clearer in many places and parts of the world. So there are some things that really that we've been shown some things maybe that we've lost in our rushing around like we all do and overworking.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping some of that gets still stays in the culture.
Me too. I'm right there with you. When I first heard, May 1st, we're gonna reopen everything, I thought, I'm not ready for that. I'm kind of liking some of this a lot.
Yeah, really.
But anyway, thank you so much, Ellen, for coming on my show. Please tell my listeners where they can find out more about you.
Well, they can go to my website, Ellen Kirschman, that's KIRSCHMAN.com. And while they're there, they could sign up for my occasional newsletter. It's about every other month. Or they can follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, and I mentioned I also blog with Psychology Today. So there are lots of places to connect, and I hope to hear from some of your listeners.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you again for tuning in to another episode on our First Responder Mental Health series on Mental Health News Radio.
Aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps, or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it, but I'm opposing.
Good boy.